going to spend about 20 or so minutes walking you through what you need to do today. You should spend about 20 minutes watching this video and listening and making notes. So I need to see evidence that you actually paid attention and took some notes down today when you watch this video. The first thing you need to make sure you have finished, though, is at least your poster, right? You need that finished. That should be finished. And then you want to transfer that information into this last piece of the source analysis chart. You must submit this by the end of class, like no question. And if you spend more time on this, you have less time to work on your thesis. So your thesis would inevitably become homework. Before we continue, a couple of things. You don't know how I want you to write a thesis statement. So you need this video. It's important that you listen to all the parts and you pay attention when I ask you to do things. This is for your benefit. And if you don't do it right the first time, you should know me by now, and I'm going to make you keep doing it until it is correct. I have no doubt that you're going to pay attention and have the most beautiful thesis statements when I get back. Okay, so that is our goal today, to focus on just thesis statements. In this video, I plan on kind of just doing that, and we'll talk more about introductions and the rest of the paper next week. One note that I want to make, and I want to make sure that this is crystal clear. At this point, we are beginning the writing phase, which means you cannot use AI at all unless I specifically tell you that you can. So always assume that it's off the table. If I suspect that you've used it, it doesn't sound like you, the tone is off, it looks nothing like what you have on your poster, I might question you about it. I might ask you to explain parts, give me the definition of this word, whatever the case may be. You will then have to come after school, no other option, and rewrite it with me staring at you. We don't want that. If you submit through Turnitin and it flags it as potential AI, that's when things can get a bit more serious, especially if you've been caught before in my class. So typically, if this happens, this results in a discipline referral and you get a 0. Your opportunity to rewrite happens in Academic Saturday and you can only earn up to 50%. Bottom line, it is not worth it. You might think, oh, it's a shortcut for right now, I'm behind. And you want to resist that urge. Once you continue down the line, it'll get flagged at some point. Once that submits to College Board, I can't help you, and you will be flagged, and you could potentially not pass this exam. And it's happened several times over the past few years. So don't be that person. Don't throw away all this work because you wanted an easy way out or you didn't want to think through something that was difficult. I'd much rather you spend a little bit more time on something and get an extra day than to use AI in an unethical way. So that's kind of my soapbox. Let's just not do it. If you have questions about that, please message me. Okay, in the grand scheme of things, we are here, kind of. So we'll talk Monday about what an introduction is and how we put that together. But today's focus is on a thesis statement, which is literally the roadmap of your paper. It is an organizational structure that provides the reader with a definite line of reasoning that they can assume you're going to discuss in that particular order. So it's really important that our thesis statements are structured and that they're grammatically correct, so that there's no question about our claims and our directions. Okay, so let's jump in. This is the structure that we use in Fort Thomas in the English department. And this should look somewhat familiar if you wrote thesis statements last year, which you should have. But really, when we're thinking about, this is kind of like an argument light. You're kind of taking a position. It's not a true persuasive argument, but we still include what's called a qualifier. When it becomes argument, that could also, or that could be a concession instead of a qualifier. Okay. So a qualifier is just kind of a limitation or some sort of constraint or mitigating factor that you're acknowledging about your topic and your claim to show that it's complex. Your claim is your direct answer to your research question. Depending on how you word this might be because, this might be such as. So it kind of depends on how these things are worded. Okay, then you have these three boxes, right? These are your three directions. You already have these if you did your poster correctly. These are those three big categories that you wrote down that you filed your sources underneath. So you already kind of have most of this finished in a way. And then you need a RAV, we know what that is, to connect everything to this broader message or universal truth. Like, what is this so what? Why is this significant? What is this telling us about this idea of sustainability? Because, yes, you must connect that. Okay, this is the exact order in which it needs to be written. However, it does not make sense to start in this order. So we actually are going to start here with your claim. You will want a separate sheet of paper to jot some ideas down. As we go through, I'll pause and give you a chance to, or you will pause, give yourself a chance to take some notes down and kind of think about different ways you could do some of these things. I expect to see that from you, right? So I'm going to be looking for that on Monday. You better have it, right? To see that you paid attention. Okay. The claim. This is the direct answer. It's that conclusion that you have drawn based on your research. It is considered defensible, right? But not absolute. And we like to use this term leaning or slanting. So it does kind of take a position, but it's more open and it's more grounded in this idea of if these circumstances are correct or if this research suggests. So you can think of it kind of as an argument claim if you want, but here are some examples. You want to use the words from your question. Like they should match. Otherwise, what are we doing, right? So these are three claims I came up with. I don't know which one I like yet, right, for my idea. And you guys could do something similar, right? You could come up with three different ways you could respond to your question, thinking about the categories that you have. So notice the bolded words, right? So like suggest. It's not absolute, right? Suggest is like these people thought this at this moment under this circumstance, right? That progress with reading is possible, right? Not necessarily a given. And it could be sustainable when we look at evidence based practices. The second one, improving, it doesn't say it automatically will, right? But if we want to improve, we have to have multifaceted approaches, right? That we're addressing both kind of how teachers teach and how students have access to things. And then over here, this is even less kind of argumentative. Emerging programs rooted in science offer a data-driven path forward. That is a claim because like someone could come along and be like, well, no, right? Or there's a different perspective here. But it's still very much more objective, I think, than the other two. So right now, I want you to pause the video and just list some ideas you have for how you could answer your research question as a claim. It doesn't have to be great, and you could maybe just bullet some ideas for right now, but like, what is your answer to this claim? Okay, so pause the video and do that. Okay, the next step in writing a thesis is to solidify your directions, which we should have already done. However, I do want to provide you with some additional things to think about if you struggled yesterday to kind of think of these categories. So really, it depends, and we talked about this, right? The type of research question that you have. So if I have like a factors question, like a cause-based, like, okay, so my categories are going to be surrounded by causes. They're each going to be a different cause or an influence. So if you look over here, there are social, economic, and educational factors. right? Like causes that contribute to low literacy. If I have an effect based question, these are more like outcomes, implications, or consequences. So some of those effects could be academic performance, social mobility, and workforce readiness. Notice that I don't really have um, a position here, right? Like academic performance, the effect could be negative or positive, right? So that depends on your perspective. So you don't need to like say the positive academic performance, right? Like increase social mobility. Like you don't need to do that because you'll discuss that more in your body paragraphs. If you have a solution based question like I did, these are like programs or methods or some kind of idea, right, that relate back to solutions. So here you see my three programs or ideas that I want to implement. If you have a to what extent question, these are interesting because these are more about like criteria, right? Or dimensions or scope of something, like the scope of the effectiveness, like under certain conditions. So like the to what extent is student engagement, part of this equation, or measurable growth or instructional consistency. Like those factors we have to consider. We have to think about how much, right? If it's a problem-based question, this is where you're talking about like barriers or like contributing factors or issues that have caused the problem. It's a little bit different than up here. These are a bit more like open. Down here, like these are legit things that are problems, right? Like funding inequities, teacher preparation, and curriculum inconsistency. So as you can see, these are a bit more defined, right? Like you can tell that they're negative versus up here because they might not all be negative. Some of them might be neutral. So I would just double check based on your research question and then think about what your categories look like. So pause the video, refer back to your poster, make some notes, put some ideas down, even if it's just like my categories look good. I think I'm ready to like solidify them, and that's fine. So go ahead and pause the video and do some investigating on your categories. Okay, the next section is the message or universal truth. So we call these kind of these big ideas, these broader contexts, broader ideas, something that holds true beyond what you're writing about, which makes it universal. Like we see the same pattern pop up in different situations. So if you look in this chart, I tried to help you as much as possible think of ways to move from an idea to a truth statement, right? And so over here, if you look at this education or literacy focus, so ideas I came up with would be things like empowerment, equity, or even human potential. So I think about how all those things maybe work in tandem. And then I definitely want to keep that sustainability piece in mind. So I'm like, okay, so maybe if we can sustain these programs or sustain anything, we want to empower individuals, right? We want to give them access to what they need. So, like true sustainability, like keeping things going, we really have to empower people, right? We have to give them access to things, and we want them to be kind of lifelong learners. So you're taking these ideas and you're making them into a statement. An idea is one word, a universal truth is a statement. You should be able to literally see the difference here, okay? So when you pause the video, I want you to list a couple universal ideas and then write them in a statement connected to this idea of sustainability. Okay, so this is difficult and you might struggle a bit, but that's fine, right? You're going to work through that. You're going to do your best to get something on your paper so that I can help you on Monday. Okay, so pause right now, list the universal ideas, and then write a truth statement. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about in terms of parts of a thesis is the qualifier. This acknowledges complexity and it builds credibility. Couple of things to note. A qualifier will always function as a subordinate clause. A subordinate clause has a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone. mainly because of one word, and that word is a subordinating conjunction. And when you add that to an independent clause, it immediately makes it subordinate and it has to rely on the main clause to survive. But this also showcases the importance of things. So it's not just the grammatically correct way to write something, but it also indicates the primary kind of purpose and like what you're focusing on and how one thing is more important to you than another. So it must be something that you're going to address at some point in the report. It can't be a placeholder. It can't be a complete opposite of your claim because that does not make sense. It should come before your claim. So you want to like state the entire subordinate clause and then put a comma at the end of that right before your claim starts. Okay, here are some examples. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I just want to point some things out. This first one, the subordinate clause is highlighted in blue. That entire thing is a dependent clause, okay? Notice that the word while is bolded. If I took that word out and I just said improving literacy across the city as vast as New York poses logistical and cultural challenges, that can stand alone. That could potentially become a claim. That's somebody's perspective, maybe. But when I add this little word here, while, it makes it subordinate and it makes it less important than my claim, which is in the italicized text, right? Recent initiatives suggest, so on and so forth. Over here, you'll see my annotation about like why this kind of works. There are two other ones that you can look through. So the entire clause is highlighted in a certain color. There's always a comma at the end, and you should always be able to find the subordinator. This one is not maybe one that you would normally use, but it does work. Down here, the subordinating clause or subordinating conjunction is although. The biggest mistake students make, if you follow me up here to the top, is they want to put a comma here. That is wrong. That is not grammatically correct. Delete that. And you wait to the very end of the clause. Okay, the very end of your qualifier, then you put a comma. Okay, so pause the video. I want you to think of some ideas for a qualifier, right, that shows maybe the complexity of something, that maybe talks about like limitations or challenges, right, to your claim. And it doesn't have to be one of these words or like topics, but these are just some things I thought about as I was putting mine together. Okay, so pause and work on your qualifier. Okay, now that you've made some notes and have some ideas, you're going to put it all together in a sentence. One sentence. Let me repeat myself. One sentence. It is definitely doable if you use grammatically correct structures, if you use punctuation, if you use word glue. It is perfectly reasonable to have a sentence. And I'm going to show you some in just a minute. So now that you have all your things, you're going to write it out in this order: the qualifier, the claim, whatever word glue you're using to connect your claim to your three big categories, your RAV that connects all of this to your big idea, period, right? So here are some examples. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I want you to notice how I've used words, okay? So here's my first punctuation mark, suggesting that before the punctuation mark, it's subordinate, and after it is my claim. And then you see this other comma here, and I'm beginning a list, right? So my word glue here is such as. So like these practices, these approaches, such as blank, blank, and blank, comma, highlighting. So I use an ing ending, and then I give my universal truth. One sentence. Over here, you can read the annotations. Same with the next two, right? Focus on looking at the punctuation, the words and phrasing that I'm using, right? Think about how I'm using RAVs, if I'm using ing, if I'm using, es or s, ed, whatever. It should match the rest of your statement. And then the third one, same thing. You want to think about how this person has used punctuation and word glue to make it a grammatically correct sentence. One sentence. Okay, so you can pause this video, go back and forth to look at the different examples, to listen to me again talk about some things. You might want to read these annotations I put together for you. But your assignment is to put your thesis statement in two places. You're going to write out your thesis statement somewhere clear and like easily visible on your poster. If that means you need to add an additional index card, that is fine. You also need to type that research question into the discussion board by 8 a.m. 8 a.m. If it's not in there by 8 a.m., you're going to get a 0 because it's not done when it should be and you can't move on, right? So you've got to hit the deadline. You can expect a short quiz over all this stuff that I just went over with you. I might ask you to list the components of a research question, or I'm sorry, a thesis statement. I might ask you the difference between a qualifier and a claim. I might ask you to tell me what directions are and what they mean, right? What they could be. So you need to make sure that you kind of understand and internalize what a thesis statement is and how we build one. Okay, that is it. So you need to make sure again, you're not going to use ChatGPT to write your thesis statement for you. That is a huge no-no. You will get in big trouble. You also need to make sure that you have some sort of working thesis with the components that I've told you in the right order with the right punctuation by 8 a.m. in the discussion board. Okay, if you have questions while you're working, depending on the time, I might be on my computer, but I will get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, I hope you guys do well and have a great weekend. If you're going to homecoming, I might see you there. Have a good rest of your day.